Welcome to our second OpenFGA community meeting. So for the people who are not part of the OpenFGA team, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. And so we have a few things to share with you today. And also we like to discuss some things, hear how you're using the product, the questions you have, this kind of things. So this will be our agenda: introductions, community news, what's happening around the OpenFGA community, things that we are working on are almost ready to ship, and the future work, some demos we did in for a hackathon, and then some Q&A. So this is our team. I'm not going to get everyone to introduce themselves to go faster, but we're a group. Right now we are 8 people, and I'm the product manager, Matthew the designer, and Jacob is the engineering manager. The rest are developers in the team. Most of them based on Canada. Some of us are not. So the flag, the size, each person picked their own flag, the one they represented them, the size where they were based or working on. So you need to guess where they're from or where they are living. Okay, so it will be awesome if you can. So I see that a lot of the people today weren't here in the last meeting. So it would be awesome if you can briefly introduce yourself, right? So your name, where you work for, what you're doing, and then what is the level of engagement or progress that you've made with your OpenFGA implementation, if any, right? So I don't know if someone kind of dares to start, but it will be awesome if we can get to know each other.
Yeah, I can start with mine. So I am Pranay. So I work at GoDaddy in the authorization team. And we have used OpenFGA project, forked it and used for our own use case. And I'm originally from Nepal, and I work from GoDaddy Kirkland office in Washington, USA.
Awesome.
I suppose I can go next. So my name is Alish from Canonical, an engineer here working on using OpenFGA for authorization in Juju.
Great. Thank you, Alice.
Hey, I'm Andrew. I'm an engineering manager at a startup in Seattle called Read AI, and we're building transcription meeting summarization app. And we started using OpenFGA in production, I think at the beginning of March. So really enjoying the project so far.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. I recognize you from Discord.
Happy to go. Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas. I'm with Movie Labs. We're a joint venture of some of the major film studios, and I'm working on a POC at the moment. We're looking at sort of implementing sort of zero trust kind of security architectures sort of across the industry in production and how that might happen. So it's pretty interesting to look at how something like this might fit in doing sort of fine-grained access and asset control.
Great, thank you, Daniel.
Yeah,
Hi,
my name's Evan. I work at a company
ahead.
called Align, and I'm a DevSecOps engineer. We're kind of in the QA, almost to our UAT environment with OpenFGA. We're just kind of moving into a more defined authorization authentication platform, and it's been going very well.
Hi, I'm Keon. I'm also working at Canonical, a colleague of Alish, on using OpenFGA in Juju, based in South Africa.
Great. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'm Alex Hamilton. I'm a software engineer and architect at a little nonprofit called Earthscope. We do geoscience. Geosciences were primarily funded by the National Science Foundation. And they've recently directed us to, we usually give away all of our data for free. We're going to continue doing that, but they want to be able to track where people are coming from. So we've recently added identity and access control to things, and we're exploring FGA as a way to let the community manage the data that we store for them.
Thank you, Alex. Welcome.
Hi,
I'm Johnny
Carlos.
from. Oh, go ahead, Carlos.
Thanks, Johnny. So hi, I'm Carlos Perez. I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I've been interested in OpenFGA since as long as I can remember, since basically it was in its inception phases. But as it stands right now, it was more of a pet project, and now it's kind of, we're starting to look at it for actual production use cases at New Relic.
I'm Johnny from Pluralsight. We are using OpenFGA in production in parallel with our current or legacy authorization solution. And we're comparing the results we get from each as we tweak our model and the data we put into it. So it will be our replacement for content authorization in the future.
Thank you, Johnny. I think we are everyone. Okay, so and thank you very much, Dean. So in the meeting invite, there's a link to an agenda. The last time what we did is kind of, there's a part there which says attendees. Last time we added the names of the attendees there and the companies. If you don't want to do that, if you for whatever reason, just please message me or write it, and we won't do it, right? Just kind of, maybe you prefer to not to be mentioned. Just please let Ragnar, and we are not going to add your name there. Okay, thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. A lot of faces that I recognized and others that I didn't, which is great because it means that there's more people that are using OpenFGA that we know, and that's usually great to find out. So some community news. So things that happen in the community that are around the OpenFGA product that might be interesting for some of you. Some of them are from Canonical, so they are probably people from Canonical know what I'm talking about. So this is a project. So Quark is a Java runtime for Kubernetes native workloads, and they implemented. So they shipped out version 3 of the product, and it has like a built-in support for authorization with OpenFGA. That was built by one of the members of the community, Kevin, who's kind of pretty active also in Discord, and he's doing a lot of work with OpenFGA and in particular with Quarkus too. So thanks, Kevin, for that. Really build something that I find it more difficult to explain, but it's like a gRPC client built in Rust that focuses in some scenarios that are useful for crypto environments and crypto problems. So that is also great to see and pretty exciting. And there's an OpenFGA SDK for Rust that was also published by Midas. Midas Lambridge also contributed the MySQL adapter for OpenFGA. So thank you very much for your help there. And then maybe the Canonical guys want to expand on this, but I learned yesterday that they are proposing a way to use OpenFGA for LXD, right, which is kind of a virtual machine container for Linux, and they are working on how to integrate OpenFGA authorization in that project. I don't know if the Canonical people want to expand on that, if they are part of that project or not, and want to.
Oh, sorry, no, sorry, we're not
okay,
part of.
We are not. Okay,
LXD.
perfect. Yeah, awesome. So 2 projects in Canonical. That's more exciting. Yeah. So thank you. Okay, so the other thing that's going on. We participated last month in KubeCon in Europe, which is pretty good for us, and for North America that is coming in November. What we want to do is we want to present with some of you. Okay, so we're looking for customers that are implementing OpenFGA, probably using any other cloud-native computer technologies like deploying to Kubernetes or whatever they might be using for that ecosystem from the CNCF ecosystem. And I think that might be a good opportunity for you to get exposure and to talk about the internal projects, and for us to also be there and show how OpenFGA is being used in the real world. So if any one of you is interested in doing this, let us know. You can DM, email me, or find us in Discord, and we can have a conversation about it. We're already having a few conversations with some companies, but acceptance rate in KubeCon is like a 10%, right? So it's difficult to get in. And there are more chances if you are not a vendor of cloud native technologies, but an end user of cloud native technologies. So like it will be more easier for Pluralsight to get accepted than for Canonical, probably, right? Because like the kind of company they are. Okay, but anyway, let us know if that is interesting to you. So now we're going to do some fun things. Last week we had a kind of an Okta-wide hackathon, and there were a couple of projects from the OpenFGA team that will kind of illustrate some things we are trying and testing. So we didn't agree who's going to start. So I see Jonathan turn on his camera and put on his headphones. So I'll let him start. Jonathan, are you ready? No? Okay, so if you are not,
I'm ready. Yeah,
you're
sorry,
ready.
I'm kind of running behind a little this morning, but yeah, I can share my screen
Okay.
and show what I
Stop
did.
sharing. Sorry. Yeah, answer. Yeah, thank you.
So I guess I'll just kind of speak to what I did first, and then I'll give you a hands-on demo of what's been done. So OpenFGA today, it's based on relationship-based access control. And so everything that you model is relationships between entities. And that's extremely powerful, especially for hierarchical-based access policies. But for attribute-based access control use cases, we today have contextual tuples, which help. But what you have to do today with contextual tuples is basically define ABAC mapping based on data that you have client side, and then provide a relationship at request time in order to kind of connect the dots, if you will. So during this hackathon, I thought it would be kind of interesting to explore using Google's common expression language, which is a non-Turing complete language that allows you to just define arbitrary expressions on any number of parameters and use that in your authorization model, your OpenFGA authorization model. And then at request time, you can pass in or inject some additional context that context will be used to evaluate those expressions. So I kind of wanted to show you the work that's been done there. And then if you guys have any questions or anything, we can go from there. So we have the OpenFGA server running here. Can you guys see my Postman screen? Okay, perfect. So here's an example of a model, and this is just a very simple model just to kind of mostly demonstrate what we're calling conditional relationships. We're adding additional conditions on a relationship. So a relationship has to both exist concretely, and some conditional expression has to be met in order for that relationship to actually be fulfilled. So here we have a simple model. We have users, document, and documents. And the document entity has a viewer relationship defined on it. And viewers can be directly related to users, but the viewer relationship is conditioned upon this condition that we've called a non-expired grant. So this is an expression here, and it's written in Google's common expression language. And it says that there is some variable called current timestamp, and it has to be less than some other variable, grant timestamp, plus a grant duration. So here, this is an example of using timestamp data type plus a duration data type. And then I've also added a condition on the user's IP address has to be within some CIDR, IP address range. So this kind of demonstrates both temporal-based ABAC policy as well as like networking or kind of geofencing-based a policy based on IP address. And you define the parameters that are involved in your expression. So, we say that the current timestamp is a timestamp type, the grant duration is a duration type, user IP is an IP address type, and then CIDR is a string that represents the CIDR kind of spec, if you will, that we will parse as a network address to compare the IP address against. So let me see, let me get Zoom out of the way here. We can go ahead and let me restart the server because I think I already had it running. They might get some conflicts, but go ahead and create that model. We got a 201 created back. And then when we write our tuples, so there's a new kind of capability here where you can partially override the context that will be used to evaluate those conditions at write time. So at write time, we might want to say this relationship, the document one viewer is being related to user X. But right now is this current timestamp. So we're granting this relationship at this time, and we're saying that this relationship is valid for 10 seconds. And this relationship also needs to come from an IP address, right? Like the user has to have an IP address, which is in this CIDR range. So we can go ahead and write that tuple and we get a 200 OK back. And then when we go to evaluate a check, we can say, just normally like we do, document 1, viewer, user X, is user X the viewer of document 1. But here we can override and inject additional context. And this is arbitrary JSON, basically, right? So the structure of this body can be anything, any JSON. And we will override the values of those other parameters involved in our condition. So the current timestamp, is this time, the user's IP address is this time. Well, it just so happens in this example, just take my word for it, this user IP address and this timestamp is within those ranges. So the condition's met, so allowed is true. But I'm going to flip over here to this other tab. And in this case, the user's IP address is within that network range, but the current timestamp is exactly at that 10-second mark. So it doesn't meet the temporal condition that has to be met. So we get allowed as false on the outcome there. And then finally, this one demonstrates, right, the temporal condition is met. So we're within the time range, but we're outside of the IP address range. So we're one kind of network address beyond that CIDR range. So we'll go ahead and call check there, and we get an allowed is false as well. So I wanted to mention, right, like this just demonstrated data types involving timestamps, durations, and IP addresses and strings. What support we added actually includes all of your primitive types. So, floats, doubles, ints, unsigned ints, booleans, strings, those data types, as well as we support, timestamps, duration, map lists. So we support generic types. You can pass in a map of any generic type. So you can do very complex kind of ABAC policies on arbitrary data types. So super powerful. And we're really looking forward to kind of exploring this a little bit more. There's quite a bit more work that needs to be done to polish this and actually like release it out into OpenFGA's ecosystem. So I don't necessarily know, I can't give you a date on when this is coming necessarily, but I can say it's coming. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. Any comment or question from the audience?
For something like
go ahead.
For something like, oh God, go ahead.
I'll make it quick. So with the parameters that you provided in that, when you defined your expression, I noticed the one thing that was interesting to me is you provide the parameters, but you don't declare whether they're required or not, which then when you did the write, you had optional parameters, and then you had provided the potential overrides or not overrides on when you did the check. Is there an intent to indicate when things are provided? I know this it's an arbitrary set of parameters, but is the intent to introduce requirements on those parameters at all?
So the parameters themselves, the expectation is that the expression defines or evaluates to a Boolean. And so in order to evaluate that Boolean, we actually need like any of the parameters that would govern the outcome of that Boolean expression. So the parameters are actually all needed. If you don't provide a parameter, we therefore cannot evaluate the expression. And so there would be support, for example, to say, we were only able to partially evaluate this expression, and so we can't actually like deterministically tell you if that condition evaluated to true or false. So they're all required technically to evaluate the condition. What you saw with the write and the check is that the write, we're persisting some of the parameters values at the time of the write, and those override anything that is provided at request time with the check. So it's a way to kind of like bind variables at write time instead of having to always provide them at check time. And that's because there are cases where at the time you're writing it, you want to establish the base condition for the bindings for those variables. Like, for example, the grant timestamp and the duration. You want to say, at the time I write this, here's the current time that I'm granting it, right? Rather than having to know a point in the past when that relationship was granted, when you're calling check, at the time you're writing it, you specify the current time. And then when you go to evaluate it, with check, the way that we actually merge the context is the persisted context dominates, it wins. So in the merge of the two contexts, whatever's persisted wins. So in that regard, if one of the variables, if you failed to provide the context that would bind one of those variables, then we wouldn't be able to evaluate the expression. And in this case, we'd return like allowed as false, or maybe even an error message of some form. I think in the future, this is some of the polishing work that I was talking about, is we would probably want to give you an allowed as false with some context as to why you got an allowed false. And we would say something like, we couldn't evaluate this expression because these variables were not bound. There were no values for them. So that's kind of some of our thinking there. Does that answer your question? Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I was thinking, Jonathan, maybe on the writes, when you write the tuple, right? At that moment, there might be some constraints or forcing you to specify some attributes on write, right? So it's like, because right now you can put them or not, right? And then the ones you specify or not, we don't have anything in the model that tells you which one needs to be there. And there's some semantics in the condition that imply that some of them needs to be in the write and others need to be in the check, okay? So maybe we can specify that somehow, and then we can validate the write and the check.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of cases to consider around this, and side effects around some of the design choices around those things. So that's kind of why I was saying, like, there's a lot of vetting of this whole kind of design in general that needs to continue to take place. And that's kind of what the bulk of the work remains to be for the team. So.
Great, thank you. More questions about that? Okay, so Ragged.
Hey folks. So what I'm gonna show is not as cool as John's, but hopefully you'll like it. So you like the playground. It's nice. It has syntax highlighting. But what it doesn't have is like a full screen view where you can write your things, and where the relations won't be shuffled around when you save, and where you can use like your normal shortcuts that you love. So part of this was we worked on a extension for VS Code. It brings in Matthew's lovely code coloring, so you can see more easily visualize what's happening. It brings in a lot of things like our reuse from what we use for the playground and the dashboard for validation. So in this case, for example, it's helpful. It tells you, oh, you're writing editor, but editor doesn't exist. Or actually you're referencing editor from parent. And if you go to the parent, which is a folder, it also doesn't have editor. So another one that tricks people up is, for example, something like admin from viewer. We usually don't allow such thing because viewer, like after from, it has to be a direct relation. So we don't allow this. We don't allow the hashtag. So it's nice. It just makes it a bit easier for you to be able to do things like this validation on the spot. It also, we bring in some of the, I don't know if anyone here has used them, but we also have some suggestion auto-completion work. So for example, let's say you want to create a new relation and like, hey, can share, and it's a user. So things like this. Duplicate. Validation working. And there's, so that's mostly it. There's one extra bonus that we have. Not everyone has it. Like, this is the syntax most people work with. But if you look at our API, it does not accept the syntax. It accepts a JSON syntax. And normally what you have to do is use our syntax transformer or use our playground and do copy to JSON. So just to be helpful a bit for you, so here you can do transform and you'll end up with the JSON syntax. That's pretty much it. Hopefully you like it. The backbone of this is done not through, like, there's an extension, but the backbone is through a language server. So in theory, it should be possible to port a lot of that for things like IntelliJ, all the IntelliJ suite, and that, like, we offer a TM language, so that should be portable to things like Sublime and TextMate. Like TM language is the part where you define languages and done by TextMate. So in theory, a lot of that should be possible based on this work. Not saying we're going to offer it, but you should be able to take and reuse if you need it. Again, we don't have a timeline when we're bringing this. Hopefully, maybe sometime soon. There's just a few bugs we need to resolve. But other than that, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's likely that Ravi's work is going to make it into the product sooner than Jonathan's work because it's kind of simpler. But yeah, so anyone is using another editor that is not Visual Studio Code? Can you type what you're using there in the chat window so we can get an idea of the editors you're using?
Someone's got to say VI or Vim. Somebody, anybody.
No, sorry, it's Emacs.
Nice. Okay, good. So what have we been doing lately? So we shipped a few things. So you might have seen that the announcement of OpenFGA v1 that kind of was announced almost like three weeks ago, and it basically packages also most of the features that we've been building in the last few months in a v1 version, and with a few more ones that we kind of mentioned in the last meeting, so we won't mention now. Then what we were working on is we added BAT check support in our SDKs. We already had it for .NET and JavaScript. We added it to the Golang one. What that one lets you do is from the client, submit a set of checks that you want to do, and we are going to do them in parallel from the SDK. So it's not that we make a single call to the server and do all the BAT checks there. We make multiple parallel calls to the server from the client, right? We are considering having a BAT check in the server too, but we are first experimenting with the client side and see how that works. And we are also adding list relations. We also added list relations implementation. That API lets you specify the different, if you want to do checks for a specific object and specific document for a few relations, you can just say, send the list of relations you want to check. That will end up calling BAT check. And but so it's a shortcut to doing those checks yourself. And that is also in the JS and the Go SDK. There are a few things that we committed but haven't shipped yet. So we had someone in Discord that I think he was writing a model with 10,000 relationships, so a number like that. And that was taking a long time. So we made some work to make that go faster. And John added support to installing OpenFGA using Homebrew. There are a couple of things that were contributed by the community. One is to specify username and password explicitly in configuration instead of just the URI for the database connection. And the other one is to be able to do something similar in the Helm chart. So specify the URI as a secret in the Helm chart. So thank you everyone for their contributions here. What are we doing now? So we are adding BAT check and list relation support for the Python SDK. That's the last one we have to complete to add those features. And today the list objects API is an interesting API. Basically lets you list all the documents that a user can view, for example, right? Today there are two ways of calling that API. One is you call it the method, that normal method that just retrieves a page, retrieves up to 1,000 tuples. So if you have more than 1,000, you cannot get them, okay? So that works only for a few use cases. That 1,000 is a number you can configure in OpenFGA, so it can be more. but it's limited and you cannot page over that. Okay. We have other endpoint that is the streaming list objects. That one lets you open a stream and start getting results. Okay. And that one was limited in two ways, by a number of records, which was 1,000 by default, and but a specific amount of time. So after 3 seconds by default, we kind of close that stream. Okay? What we're doing is we're removing the limitation on the number of tuples that we return on list objects in the streaming API. So basically you can call it, and if you like before 3 seconds, you need to get everything you can, right? And it can be any number of tuples. Right? In general, the way we're recommending using list objects is, what happens with list objects is you're going to get a list of IDs, and you want to show those IDs in a UI, right? So in a list in your UI, right? And usually you do it, you get a list of IDs, and then you do something like a select from whatever table you have, where a document ID in this list, okay? To use it in a SQL statement like that, the number of documents or IDs cannot be very large, right? So it can be 1,000, it can be 1,000,000, right? So you can use list objects within your streaming API for scenarios where you think like the in clause is going to work on your database query side, right? So if that's the case, you can use list objects. If you think the non-streaming one, if the number of records is going to be less than 1,000 by default, or you can use the streaming one if you think that the number of records might be higher, but you'll be able to get them in 3 seconds, which probably are a lot of them. Right? Does it make sense? Because this one of the API that is can be confusing to use, and we are seeing also sometimes that customers start using it thinking that they will be able to get all the data, all the relationships, right? And they think, yeah, 1,000 is going to be enough, but at some moment it's not enough anymore, right? So I think it's important for you kind of to understand how it works. And this new variation of the streaming one it helps you use it in more use cases. Any questions about list objects in general and the streaming and non-streaming API?
So I have a quick question. Specifically because we're having to solve this problem right now, where we have multiple services that want to return data, and that data, the caveat here is that it's paginated, right? So we need to paginate over the data, but also reduce what is visible based off of their access privileges. So one pattern we had looked at was query the data first, pass all the IDs over to a policy check, and that would then give us the reduced list. But that has the potential of saying, I query the first 100 records out of the database, pass 100 records to the policy check, it may only return 2. Now I have to go back to the database for the next 100, and I might get 1 or 0. And the user requested 100 records. So unless I plan on providing them 2 the first time and then 1 the next time, and never really give them a full page, the server is cycling, trying to acquire 100 until it satisfies that, or it runs out of records, right? That didn't seem like the most efficient route to go. So we were looking at other options, and one of the options we are looking currently is providing the policy back to the query executor and have them convert that policy into effectively multiple where clauses.
Yeah.
That seems like the only efficient route to do this, because no matter whether you get your IDs beforehand or after the fact, you still have the problem that, pagination throws all those things off, and you can't synchronize pagination across 2 services without some severe complexity.
Yeah. So the use case you're describing is kind of, we have a page in our documentation called like search with permissions that describes those use cases. The one where you're describing is the one, is when you get a page of data from your database, only a few of those records are going to be visible, right? So calling check for each one or checking each one is very inefficient, right? If you want to use that with list objects, the way list object would be a good solution for that problem. If the number of records you get from so if the number of resources that the user can see, the total number of resources the user can see, okay, the IDs of those can fit well in an in clause, right? Like in a SQL where ID equals in this list, right? So it might happen that for a specific use case, that's the case. I don't know, you're seeing the number of projects you have. Yeah, you are not going to have millions of projects, right? So maybe list object can give you the list of projects you can see, right? If you can have millions of projects, then list object is not going to work because you need to build that list of IDs that then you need to pass to a SQL in clause, right? So for that,
Andres,
yeah.
I do want to be careful about using in specifically because Postgres, which I know is the backend for FGA, does support table parameters, which is not the same as an in clause. And then you can just do joins on those table parameters.
Yes.
At which point you're not limited to some arbitrary number of things that fit in an in clause, right?
It's interesting because that's true, but even if we are using Postgres, you're not going to be able to join with that Postgres table from your system, right? So you're going to call an API to get the IDs, right? So the join needs to happen on your side, right? So what you could do is you could get the results, the million tuples that we have in our site using this streaming API, right? Store them in a table and then do a join on your side with a table, right? Or something like that. So that is possible, but it's still depending on the number of records, that is something that is feasible or not. Okay. So the number of records that you're gonna want to join with, right? So I don't know in your scenario how that looks. What is the total number of records that could be displayed in that page that you are talking about, that specific one?
In a singular page, it's not that big. I mean, at maximum, maybe 1,000. But the total number of things that user might have access to are in the tens of thousands. So,
okay. Yeah.
I think this is an example of, and anytime in your data set, if you're applying filtering, sorting, which implies pagination as well, you're going to be butted up against a problem with the list objects API. Period.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that. We're aware of that, right? So in that documentation that Rag posted, we kind of break it down into three variations of different ways to apply search with permissions. And they kind of get, as you move from number one, I think to number three, if I got my ordering right, the more general solution here requires you to have some kind of index of the permissions client side that you can apply a native database join with, which is what you're implying, Carlos. And that is absolutely true. The challenge there is, how does OpenFGA provide you that index, right? Because if you're going to have that index, we're going to have to either give you like a flattened index. So we're going to have to basically flatten the relationship and give you a flat index that then you can index in your database and join on. Or we have to give you the building blocks that allow you to be able to build that index client side, and then you can build that flat index yourself. If it sounds like you right now are kind of doing that, right? You're taking the model and you're basically flattening the relationship from the model and then indexing that in your database to solve that advanced use case. And honestly, that's what we would probably recommend. What we would like to see in the future, obviously, and this is in our roadmap at some point, it's a very hard problem, but we would like to provide that index to you, right? We would like to stream an index to you for the objects and relations that you are applying those filters for. Because I assume you're only doing that for a handful of entities in your system that you're showing in your UI. You're not doing that for all entities in your system, right? So that's kind of our thinking there is, we understand the limitations with list objects for this particular use case where you're filtering or sorting, paginating. And those are kind of some of the things that we've been thinking about of what we could do in the future to address those use cases.
Yeah, just to summarize, list objects, even for filtering and sorting and paginating, can work if the number of records you have is not that large, right? Like if it's like 2, 3, 400, 4,000 records might work, right? If you have like a 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, probably not, right? So that's kind of where the limitation arises. And just to clarify what Jonathan is saying, that so that index that we will be able to let you build is something that says user 1 can view this document, right? In a flattened way, not based on like so if a user belongs to a group and the group has access to a folder, right? Each time you add a user to a group, we will tell you this user now has access to this can view this document, right? Because it belongs to a group that has access to a folder. So each time an event happens in our site, that impacts permissions to users, and we can stream those to you so you can index them and then show it locally, right? That's the problem that we want to solve, that is difficult to solve, but it's kind of the generic solution for this problem. The only scenario that is challenging is that when you make a change on your site, write a tuple that implies millions of changes in permissions. For example, let's say you have a folder with 1 million documents, right? You add a user to a group that has access to the folder, then the permissions for that user imply now they has a million more permissions, right? Because they can access all the documents in that folder. For us, streaming those to you and you indexing those, that can be challenging too, right? Because it implies that you need to ingest 1 million tuples and index them very quickly, right? Sorry, Andrew, you had your hand raised for a while.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the way that we've built it, at least so far, is we like maintain a list of like access records in our application database. And we use that to seed the search to OpenFGA. So we'll like say, hey, we think that Andrew has access to this document and he can edit it. And then we build a set of checks that we send to OpenFGA. And one of the bigger issues that we've had so far with that from a performance perspective is that we actually implemented running those checks asynchronously, or sending those checks asynchronously to the OpenFGA service. And we're using the Python SDK. And we're switching to using gRPC, and we've seen that that's actually quite a bit faster. But it still adds quite a bit of latency if like I'm making a query for the last 6 months of meetings that I've had, the number of checks is quite large. And so one of the features that I think we'd be interested in seeing is like being able to make that batch request directly to the service so that it can make all of them in a single request, or make 100 checks in a single request rather than needing to send each of those as its own request to OpenFGA.
So you're seeing that the main bottleneck actually is established is just firing off n number of requests, and the overhead for each one of those network requests is really, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like we might make a couple thousand requests for loading a listing page if we want to know like the full set of permissions that I have for reports for my team over the last month. So
yeah.
Did you consider using list objects for that scenario?
I think that we would. So the response limit was an issue. And then I don't think that list objects was actually production ready when we went to production. So we haven't made that change yet. And then the other thing too is like, if I think it'd be helpful if there was some, I don't know how hard it'd be, but like if the responses were sorted by time, because if I'm trying to make a query for like the reports that I have access to, I generally like will want the most recent documents, not necessarily all of the documents all time. So I don't know how that fits in, but
yeah, you will need to you will get the IDs from these objects and join that
Yeah.
with your table, right? And then do
Yeah.
whatever sorting and filtering you want there. Yeah.
So then I
Okay.
think it kind of becomes a question of like, is it faster to go through list objects to get everything and then do the sorting on our side, or
It should be. It should be. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's something
Okay.
you can give it a try. Right?
You can
Okay.
use the streaming, so not just list objects. List objects has a streaming part, which and over RPC, so that should offer you much better performance.
Yep.
Do you have by any chance and or but not in your model, or is it just?
we want to add it?
Okay.
Like we have plans to add it, but I don't think the current version that we're running has that.
Good. Yeah. So that's the other thing we're working on now, which is improving the performance of this object is not good when you have a relationship with and or but not, and that's something we are working on improving now.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are running out of time, which is unfortunate. And so I will stop here. So the other things we had, what's next? Okay, so like a CLI, VS Code integration that Rag already showed, and Java SDK. And then we were discussing internally if we want kind of go do what prototype what Jonathan showed in the hackathon, or invest on improving the way we authorize calls to the OpenFGA server. Today we have like a per server secret or a credentials. We want to do it per store, or maybe different permissions per store for different client IDs, things like that are more flexible. So that's something we're considering and we're discussing internally. And then I have some ideas to show you how the FGA CLI, but I think we can skip that and discuss it in the next meeting. I don't know if anyone has anything to say or comments or questions or things we can follow up later. Yeah, go ahead.
Perhaps, a few questions. So first off, any chance there might be nested authorization models in the future? Because I see many parts of our company redefining the same auth model over and over again,
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the idea there is that when you say nested, you say there are some core parts of the authorization model that is shared across the organization,
Yes.
right? And then there are certain parts that are per team, okay? And
Exactly.
so yeah, that makes sense. That so we are discussing a couple of ideas about that. One is having kind of namespaces that define those things, and there's a global namespace that is shared across models, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, you could, and then consider this authorization thing, right? This way of adding authorization to the system. We could say these specific client IDs can write to this namespace, okay, or can read from this namespace, something of permissions like that, right? So that will let you have a single model with namespaces per team, okay, and then each team managing their own piece. Right? So that's one idea we're considering. The challenge there with that approach is that if you want each team to modify their own namespace, right, and there's a single model, so you can solve that problem with PR reviews and permissions who can update the model, right? But there's still a single model, even if there are different people managing different pieces, right? The other one will be kind of splitting that model in multiple files with different ownership for each file, but then combining that a single one when you go to the server. So these are the kind of things we're thinking of. But I think we can follow up on that, Alex, because I'd love to know more about what you want to do there, what you want to achieve, because it can help us in these conversations. But yes, authorization in general can help us in that problem, but there are maybe other solutions that might be better for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time. And please, if you have any question or comment, feel free to follow up offline or by any other means that you know, like a Discord, email, or GitHub, whatever. And yeah, we'll have another one of these in a month. So we'll love to see you there. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you then.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks.